Hey everyone, and welcome back. In this video I want to talk to you about the Perform tab and just walk you through the basics of how to use it and navigate, etc. So in the last couple of videos we've covered the Editor tab, which is by far the most complex part of the software, and we've also covered the I/O tab, which is the content graph essentially. And in this video we're going to talk about the Perform tab. It's definitely the simplest. You've got your canvas here, which is where you put all of your widgets, and you have your attributes for those widgets over here. And so that's another thing, just to reiterate. In the editor we have objects, in the I/O tab we have nodes, and in the Perform tab we have widgets. They're all really objects in the end of the day, but that's kind of the labels that we're giving them, so as they pertain to those different categories. So in the Perform tab we have basically two modes of use. We have the edit mode, which allows you to create widgets and place and size them on the canvas here, and you can also edit those. And then when you're ready to actually use your interface, right, you'll hop over to Perform mode, and this will basically make your canvas full screen. You can hit tab to quickly jump between these. I recommend that. And moving right along, we have the canvas, which has no tools at the moment. Again, this is a work in progress, but there will be stuff here eventually. Things like select all, or maybe viewport underlay, etc. Over here under select, again, also nothing yet. We will. These will have things like select all, deselect all, so on and so forth. Widget, we have a few things here. As you can see, not much. We have delete all in canvas, and duplicate. And then, of course, the main component here, which is the create dialog. If you've been following on with the last few videos, this will look familiar. We have our categories here on the left, but you'll notice there is no subcategories. Only categories, the top category here. And this may change once we get more nodes in here, but there's just not enough to justify a second filter. So you've got your first category in your search bar, and you can pretty much just find what you need that way. So the way things work in the Perform tab, you have two main categories, generic and system. And the simplest distinction between these is that system widgets are things you generally only create once. Very specific things that have a very specific purpose, maybe a very specific workflow. So here, for example, the only thing that's actually functional at this point of this video is the Viz widget, which is a very important one, albeit it allows you to see basically a view into your editor. So let's go and create like a real quick thing here. I'll just make a cube, and then over here in the Perform tab, you'll notice that cube shows up. Now, you can't actually navigate the camera, right? You can only see. So you need to position your camera here, get it to the place that you like. If you're looking at a stage, you may want to position this from the perspective of an audience. If you have your camera animated, then of course that's going to animate for you when you hit play. But regardless, this is your Viz widget. This is an example of a system widget, and once you position this with the handles and by dragging around on the actual tile, you can also still position it here. Right? This is in grid units. You can adjust the resolution of your canvas here and make this a more refined grid or more of a coarse grid. It's up to you. And then of course size is going to resize it from the bottom left. And again, you hit tab, you can go back over here and you can see just what this looks like. So now let's go back to the create tab and let's talk about generic widgets. So this is where a lot of your custom VJ interface items will be built from. You have things like sliders, which are the most basic UI element. They're really not meant to serve any particular purpose. You can make them whatever you want them to be. So you can have a collection of vertical sliders right next to each other, like so, and maybe a horizontal slider. And of course, you see we get some duplicate names, so they're getting renamed automatically. And then once you're in Perform mode, these are different than most sliders in GeoPix because they are geared towards complete and total efficiency, right? You don't want any frame drops or any performance degradation in this mode. So these are a little bit different than most sliders. So you can left drag and release on either side to do a quick set. This is useful if you're using a touch interface. You can also middle mouse drag, which is going to do a smooth fade. So if you want to kind of slowly fade the lights out in a venue or slowly fade them back on, this allows you to automate that, right, without having to try, to do it with your hand. But you don't have to use that. And you can also right click and map this stuff. We're going to talk about that in a separate video related to just creating perform interfaces, but just know that this is kind of the basics of how this works. So if we go back to edit mode, we also have a couple other things here. We have a button bank. We also have a button widget. It's a single button. We also have a macro widget, which looks similar to a button, and it's very close. It works the same. As you can see, we get some errors because this isn't actually hooked up to anything, but if we just make a quick macro here, and we go back over here, still getting errors. So let's go ahead and edit this. And so our macro name, let's go ahead and figure out what we have this called. Let's call this test macro. And I'll copy the name here. Oops. And we'll go back to the perform tab and we'll just go ahead and paste that in here. You'll notice that once we paste a proper name, we now have an icon for that. And you can see that we're actually triggering this macro. So that's pretty cool. So we can also do momentary fade, momentary instant. There's a few different ways that we can control this macro. And again, we're not going to get into too much of this at the moment, but basically it allows us to work with macros and trigger things in a grid formation. We can lay out our macros however we want. We can also make these smaller. So if you want a bunch of small buttons, you can do that. If you want something that's a wider aspect ratio, you can do that as well. So lots of different options. And all of these buttons can be mapped. That's a very complex thing on its own. And like I said, we'll get into that later. Button banks, you find that orange highlight, you right click on that. That's what you map. So you can also map the buttons. They're different than the group. And there you have it. So perform tab is obviously, like I said, still a work in progress. There's going to be a lot of things that change and get added. And once we get to that phase, one of the main differences you'll see is that you're going to have the option to create multiple canvases up here, and that will allow you to basically create different interfaces that you can quickly switch between. Maybe using the keys 1 through 9 on your keyboard, or maybe some other formation, maybe control 1 through control 9. I don't know yet, but that's going to allow you to create maybe a slider bank on one, a button bank on another, maybe a third is going to be your macro spread, and maybe they all kind of do the same thing, but they do it in different ways. It's going to be a very flexible system that allows you to do a lot of different things. So that's about it for this video. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this, stay tuned for the next one. Thanks a lot.